Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin Laneuville, and this presentation is for the course CNT 6418, or Digital Forensics 2. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a description of what digital forensics is and provide some history on how it's changed throughout its existence. Additionally, I wanted to discuss a few court cases, and I also wanted to discuss how those court cases, the ruling on them, it changed the way digital forensics carry out their business. Before we get into the history of digital forensics, I think it's really important to understand what exactly digital forensics is. First and foremost, digital forensics is a branch of forensic science. Nowadays, computers are used for committing crime more than ever, and thanks to this, law enforcement feels the need to increase their usage of computers to fight crime. Digital evidence is stored or transmitted in binary form that can be relied on in court. It can be found on computer hard drives, CDs, DVDs, flash drives, pretty much any form of digital media you could think of. Digital evidence is commonly associated with electronic crime, or e-crime. E-crime consists of things like child pornography, credit card fraud, or network intrusion, someone infiltrating a business's network to try to find out some more information. Digital forensics can be used to stop all types of crime, not just e-crime. For example, if law enforcement officials find a cell phone at a crime scene, they could examine the contents of that cell phone to find out more information, gain some possible leads, and determine the relationship with other suspects. In an effort to fight cybercrime and collect relevant digital evidence for all crimes, law enforcement agencies are ramping up their investigation and teaching tactics when it comes to digital forensics. Law enforcement agencies are challenged with the ability to collect digital evidence and keep up with a rapidly evolving field. This is because technology is ever growing and ever changing. Since digital forensics has evolved so rapidly throughout the recent years, let's take a look back at the history that leads up to where we've gotten to today. Let's now talk about the early stages of computing. Between the 1960s and the 1980s, computers were not typically used by the general public. They were used by corporations, universities, and government agencies. So many common citizens didn't have the ability to use a home computer. The advent of the IBM PC, which released, I believe, in the early 1980s, resulted in an explosion of computer usage. So the first PCs were quite powerful, but they didn't have very many applications, if any. And additionally, they weren't user-friendly whatsoever. So these computers enabled hobbyists, self-proclaimed computer hobbyists, to write program code, access the internals of operating systems and hardware, and basically just get an understanding of this newfound technology. As PC usage increased and modifications were made to computer terminals, the group of computer hobbyists branched off, and some of those individuals began using computers to commit cybercrime. This created the need for law enforcement officials to investigate these matters. And at the time, there were some law enforcement personnel from a wide variety of organizations that came together, and they decided to form an organization to combat computer crime. Some of the key individuals I have written down here were Mike Anderson, Jim Christie, Karen Matthews, they represented the Department of Defense, Ron Peters and Jack Lewis from the U.S. Secret Service, Tom Seipert and Roland Lascola from other local law enforcement agencies. There were other law enforcement agencies that participated in this, some of which were from Canada, and many of them became charter members of the first organization dedicated to digital forensics. This became known as the International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists, or IACIS. There were a lot of other individuals that also participated in this. This is just a list of some of the highlights of founding members. And what this organization did is they collaborated and they shared an understanding that computers would play a critical role in criminal investigations in the upcoming years, and that computers are going to be a fantastic source of evidence when investigating crime. All of the individuals in the organization believe this to the extent that they spent a lot of their own time and money to learn about new computer technologies, and they invested a lot of personal resources in founding this agency. They had to do this because law enforcement agencies at the time, they weren't very supportive in helping digital forensic investigators. And this is because so little was known about the field at the time. It was in its infancy. The field of digital forensics was in its infancy at the time, and no one necessarily believed in them investigating these types of crimes. They felt it was unnecessary, or it was a waste of time, it was a waste of money, because at the time the practices they used were archaic compared to the things we do now. Um, Without the aforementioned inspired and timely efforts of those founding members of the IACIS, we wouldn't the advances that we made in digital forensics wouldn't be possible because they were the foundation for the field, and we attribute what we do today because of them. It's important to note that the early efforts made by the individuals in the IACIS were limited in North America. Like I mentioned, some individuals were from Canada. Law enforcement officials in Europe, Asia, and Oceania were also struggling with the same problems that we were over here in the United States, and they were making the same personal commitment to prepare themselves and their organizations for the future of computer crime and the investigative body of digital forensics. So, because of this need for international collaboration, the FBI decided to host the first international conference on computer evidence in 1993. This conference was held at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, and it was represented by over 26 countries that came in support of this. At the conference, they discussed many things. Mainly, they agreed that all countries and communities, law enforcement agencies, needed to band together and coordinate their efforts, share their experiences, and provide assistance to each other where they saw fit. In 1995, there was another conference, and it was held in Baltimore this time. At this conference, an organization was developed to support these claims. It was titled the International Organization on Computer Evidence, or IOCE. The cases investigated by this organization and digital forensic examiners across the world were very basic by today's standards. Much of the focus was on recovering data from standalone computers. Data recovery was a tricky issue, mainly because the storage was costly and users routinely deleted data and reformatted the digital media that they were using. And at the time, the software that they had to handle those types of issues wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is today, so they ran into problems when it came to recovering deleted data or something that was formatted. The use of inexpensive computers were typically used to hack telephone systems around this era, and criminals and even young, like teenagers who were hacking enthusiasts or things like that, found ways to hack into the telephone network so they could get their phone bill for free pretty much. They were getting free telephone service. And they found a way to do this while keeping themselves anonymous, and investigators weren't able to find a way to stop it. The subjects of computer crime investigations were generally traditional criminals who used computers to support their activities, or, like I said, young people, computer hobbyists, computer enthusiasts, who wanted to basically flex their skills and illegally obtain computer access, software, things like that. At the time, digital forensics, the practice of digital forensics, was a pretty unfounded area still. Though it made progress, it was still in its infancy, pretty much. And they operated in direct conflict with geographic and statutory bound practice of criminal investigation. And that was one of the things that the IOCE, along with other organizations, tried to help with. Criminals operated across all borders. They weren't bound by city borders to commit their crime, state borders to commit their crime, even national borders. The cyber world was all connected. But investigators quickly realized that they weren't connected to one another. And they had no choice but to communicate and work directly with their peers. And no matter where they were located, they had to collaborate to help stop these cyber crimes from occurring and investigate what went on during the course of these cyber crimes. The digital forensic practice also operated in direct conflict with traditional laboratory forensic science research because it was in its infancy and a lot of funding wasn't allocated to digital forensics. Examiners were pretty scarce when it came to equipment and space to perform their work. Digital forensics practitioners conducted their examinations wherever they could find space. And one of the articles that I was reading, they actually touched on that the earliest digital forensic examiners who worked for law enforcement agencies did some of the work like in the basement of the agencies from their own home, and they wouldn't have their own personal computers to conduct these investigations. They would actually use seized computers from previous crimes. Because of this, some law enforcement agencies saw the need to expand and evolve in their digital forensic practices. And because of this, the first laboratories began being built. And like I said, some agencies saw the need to invest in the digital forensics field because they realized that this is going to be the new age of criminality and the new age of crime. So overall, computer forensic science is largely a response to a demand for service from the law enforcement community. And as early as 1984, the FBI laboratory and other law enforcement agencies realized that they needed to develop programs to examine computer evidence. So they began developing laboratories, task forces, things like that, specific programs and agencies to combat cybercrime. Some of these programs that I have listed here include the IRS. They created the Seized Computer Evidence Recovery Specialist Program, or SCERS. The U.S. Secret Service created the Electronic Crimes Special Agent Program, or ECSAP, and the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations created the Defense Computer Forensic Laboratory, or DCFL. Each agency adopted a different model of selection, training, and operations based on its structure and culture. So these agencies, they worked together as a whole, but overall they had their own independent tasks that they were in charge of. For example, the IRS would specialize in fraud, tax crimes, things having to do with money, things like that, while the Air Force would spend their time, resources with matters dealing with national security. So even though there was a consensus and collaboration between agencies, there was still definitely distinct jobs that each one had to do. To properly address the growing demands of investigators and prosecutors in a structured manner, the FBI established the Computer Analysis and Response Team, better known as CART. This organization had the responsibility for analyzing computers. Although CART was unique to the FBI, many of the functions and the organization abilities that it carries out are duplicated throughout law enforcement agencies across the United States, just because it is a general analyzing computers. That was their responsibility. In 1995, the U.S. Secret Service conducted a survey, and the results of that survey indicated that 48% of the agencies had computer forensic laboratories, and that 68% of the computer evidence seized in investigations for that agency was being forwarded to those labs. And this is a dramatic increase from the early stages of digital forensics. And obviously nowadays that number has progressively increased. As encouraging as these statistics are, that 48% of agencies had labs at the time, the same survey conducted by the Secret Service indicated that 70% of the law enforcement agencies were doing work without written procedures or directives or any proper guidelines, any set-in-stone guidelines for their agency to carry out. And a big part of this is that there are ongoing efforts to develop examination standards and to provide structure for computer forensic investigations. And these efforts are ever changing, in part because of the advancements in technology that our society provides. Every day there's new advancements, and the realm of digital forensics is always changing. But the other part of this that causes sort of the ongoing um, the ongoing task of updating these rules, these regulations, is because of rulings in the court of law. And there's a couple different court cases that I wanted to talk about pretty briefly while I still have time, and give you an understanding of why digital forensics tasks are always being updated, always changing. So one interesting case that I wanted to provide a little bit more knowledge on was U.S. versus Romm. This case took place in the U.S. Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit, on July 24th, 2006, and the court was deciding if the contents of a laptop computer was permissible to be searched at an international border without a warrant or reasonable suspicion, reasonable cause, probable cause, things of that nature. The defendant in this case was named Stuart Romm, and he allegedly used his computer to visit websites containing images of child pornography. The key point in this case that I found to be interesting and relates to digital forensics because it allowed the evidence to be permissible in court was that the case was able to go to trial because of the border search doctrine. And this doctrine states that the government may conduct routine searches of persons entering the U.S. without probable cause, reasonable suspicion, or a warrant. During the investigation, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, did an analysis on the computer, and this revealed multiple images of child pornography. The defendant suggested that the evidence should be suppressed because of the result of an unlawful border search, and Romm also argued that he could not be found guilty of possessing child pornography because he didn't download it directly to his hard drive. ICE confirmed, Immigration and Customs Enforcement later confirmed that the illegal images were erased off the internet cache by the defendant, Stuart Romm, and agents also testified that the Romm was the person who deleted the files. Evidence showed that the Romm's internet cache was deleted at 2:25 p.m. on February 2nd, 2004, and that was the same exact time that Romm was placed on a flight back to the United States after being detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So, in conclusion of the United States versus Romm case, the defendant's laptop was permissible without probable cause under the border search doctrine, and sufficient evidence for jury to find that Romm knowingly possessed and received illicit images was because that his computer was submitted as evidence. Without that border search doctrine in effect, the case would have been pretty much thrown out because the prosecutor wouldn't have had any weight to his or her argument. The other court case that I wanted to talk about pretty briefly was the United States versus Flyer. This case took place in the United States Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit, on February 8th, 2011. And the defendant, Flyer, was appealing a conviction that was upheld in the federal court. And this conviction was for 2 counts of shipping and transporting child pornography, 1 count of possession of child pornography on his PC, and 1 count of possession of child pornography on CD disk and floppy disk. Basic backstory was Flyer uploaded child pornography images to LimeWire, which at the time was a very popular file sharing website, and an undercover FBI agent, Robert Andrews, attempted to download these files. Andrews identified the defendant's address by contacting the internet service provider in near his area, and ultimately the FBI obtained a search warrant to seize Flyer's property. They seized a personal computer, CDs, floppy disks, DVDs, an Apple laptop, a thumb drive, and the family's computer. And Flyer actually admitted to using his PC and his laptop to download, save, and share child pornography. But when the FBI was investigating this, they made an error. And the error made was they allowed the computer conducting the investigation to mount one of the pieces of evidence. And this allowed access into the files stored onto the defendant's computer. On top of that, the FBI agent at the time lied and said that nothing occurred and everything was within FBI protocol. And that turned out definitely to not be the case. So the defense team jumped all over the FBI's mistake, and they were able to capitalize because they challenged the sufficiency of the evidence to support Flyer's conviction. The court concluded that Flyer's conviction must be overturned because the government did not present evidence that Flyer knew of the files on the unallocated space of his PC's hard drive. And that's because they weren't allowed to submit the evidence because a mistake was made during the investigative process. And as a result, the court reversed Flyer's convictions on all 3 counts, and this really goes to show that all the know-how in the digital forensics world can mean absolutely nothing if you don't follow a very strict and strenuous standard operating procedure, directive, depending on what your agency has. And it really shows that all agencies need a collaborative effort, and you need to be unison in how they handle evidence when preparing for trials. So if, in this case, if the FBI agents were a little bit more careful and they followed their standard operating procedures at the time, they probably wouldn't have had this issue, and the convictions would have been upheld, and a man who was previously convicted on child pornography wouldn't be free right now. I hope that this brief PowerPoint presentation was able to give you some knowledge on the history of digital forensics, as well as some of the agencies and task forces that deal with cybercrime each and every day. As you can see from the couple court cases that are provided in this presentation, technology and the court of law really dictate how digital forensics operates. And because of that, digital forensics is an ever-growing field, and regulations, policies, directives, things of that nature will always be changing because of the nature of the field. Technology will always advance, and there will always be new findings in the court of law that will guide the ruling of digital forensics. Thank you for listening, and below on this slide you will find my references that were used throughout this presentation. Thank you.